Welcome to a review of the Nightblade abilities from a stamina user's perspective. I'm going to go over each of the skill lines as well as dual wield and bow, uh, because those are skills commonly used by stamina Nightblades. So to start with, we've got our first class skill line, which is Assassination. And we'll start with the ultimate ability. You can see it's already morphed into Soul Harvest. The base form is Deathstroke. The Soul Harvest morph is interesting because it gives you additional ultimate when you kill enemies, and that's if you kill them in any way. So AoEs, single targets, doesn't matter. If they die and this power is slotted on your bar, you get 10 ultimate. Now the important thing is that's not 10 ultimate that can be used to cast Soul Harvest. It can, but it's not limited to that. It can be used to cast either ultimate. So the common use for this is you put Soul Harvest on the bar where you're going to be killing the most things, usually your AoE bar because that's the one that's going to have the most enemies dropping. And then on your other bar, you have the ultimate that you actually want to cast, something more powerful or more costly. Or you can just cast Soul Harvests really quickly. It only costs 50, so it's really quick to power up. Nightblades in general have the advantage of being one of the fastest ultimate earning classes in the game. And this power is one of the big reasons why. 10 ultimates, quite a lot by comparison to other things that give you ultimate. The other morph of it, Incapacitating Strike, is notable for the stun that it provides. That's more useful in PvP, where 4.5 seconds of stun versus an enemy player might be enough time to kill them. So Incapacitating Strike, more of a PvP ability. Also, it does disease damage, so that factors in a little bit closer to a stamina character. Once you get into champion points, there's a break between stamina characters who do physical damage, also get bonuses to disease and poison. Magicka characters who do magic damage, as Soul Harvest is, also get bonuses to ice and fire and the rest. But still, for PvE, you're pretty much going to want Soul Harvest. The first ability that you unlock in the actual skill line starts off as Assassin's Blade, and you can see here I've already got it morphed. This is the first example of a power whose morph breaks it off between Magicka and Stamina. So powers like this are really easy to make a choice for if you're a Stamina user. Always go for the Stamina option. In this case, that would be Killer's Blade, which does disease damage, does more damage to enemies below 25% health, and the morph converts it to being a stamina ability rather than the magic ability. Also, you'll heal 20% of your max health if, after using this, the target dies within 2 seconds. So you don't even have to be the one to kill it, just as long as you've used it right before the target dies. And generally, because of how much damage this does, it's got a good chance of killing most regular targets who are in execute range, meaning 25% health or less. Or if it's a big giant boss, you're just going to be spamming this over and over and over again because it's your best damage against targets who are executable. The next power, Lotus Fan, starts off as Teleport Strike. This is probably the best charge in the game. What it does is literally teleports you from one place to the mob that you're trying to fight, so you don't get stuck on terrain. Even if you're immobilized in place, you can still flash from one point to the other and hit them. So it's just an excellent way of closing distance. And here again, you can see there's a difference between the morph changes it from Magicka to Stamina. So for a Stamina user, you're looking at Ambush. And the extra benefit that you get from the morph, in addition to being stamina based, is that after you use it, you're granted Empower, which means your next attack is going to do 20% more damage. That's particularly nice because you can ambush into a Soul Harvest or ambush into something else that does a lot of damage and have 20% more of that. Also, if you're using it against players, they're snared. Like I said, PvP is its own world, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into that. If you're Magicka, Lotus Fan has a small AoE component to it as well. The next power starts off as Blur, and then morphs into either Double Take or Mirage. I've got it morphed for Double Take, which grants Major Expedition. Basically, it's a speed boost for 4 seconds. Surprisingly handy for moving around. As a stamina character, a little less so because you won't have the magicka to just endlessly recast this. Instead, what you'll get is Major Evasion, which is a 20% chance to be missed, and you'll get Minor Resolve and Minor Ward, which are small increases to your physical and spell resistance, so you take a little bit less damage. It's not really going to be a major benefit for you, though. The next power starts as Mark Target and morphs into either Reaper's Mark or Piercing Mark. Here again we see a distinction between what's basically a PvP power in Piercing Mark and a PvE power in Reaper's Mark. The big benefit to Piercing Mark is it reveals invisible and stealth enemies. So if another player is stealthed, if they're hidden, you cast this on them. It'll reveal them. If you cast it on them, they won't be able to get back into stealth either. The big advantage for Reaper's Mark is if you mark an enemy and they die, you heal for 61% of your max health, and you gain Major Berserk, which increases your damage by 25%, which is a huge, huge bonus. Nothing else comes close to that. In both cases, you can only have one of them on a target at a time, so if you're fighting like 12 mobs, you have to pick which one you want to have weakened, but that's still pretty handy. Reaper's Mark is going to be the way to go. Even as a stamina character, you can afford the magicka that it costs, and a 61% heal is enormous. The last power starts as Grim Focus, and it morphs into either Merciless Resolve or Relentless Focus. In both cases, and even in the base Grim Focus version, there's a special effect to this. The basic thing that happens when you cast it is you gain Minor Berserk, which increases your damage by 8%. Not a giant boost, but it's something, and it's not particularly costly to cast. It lasts a decent amount of time at 20 seconds. In both cases, though, if you do 4 light attacks, the ability actually changes into a different ability called Assassin's Will. And Assassin's Will is a one-shot power that does an enormous amount of damage. In the case of Merciless Resolve, which is kind of more of the magicka-based one, in addition to doing that, it will reduce their speed by 40%. In the case of Relentless Focus, which although it costs magicka, has more of a stamina build focus to it. When you cast it, your damage goes up by 8%, and you get stamina recovery by 10% for 20 seconds. So that's pretty decent. Let me show you how this one works. I've actually got it slotted here. So if I come up here, and you see little Plague Husk, I'll cast it. That's the animation. I do 1, 2, 3, 4. See, it changed, and now Assassin's Will. That did 30,000 damage to that thing. So you can see how that's a very effective power. Moving on to the next skill line, we've got the Shadow skill line. The ultimate starts as Consuming Darkness and has 2 different morphs, Veil of Blades and Bolstering Darkness. This is an example of one where the effect changes pretty drastically based on how you morph it. In both cases, it conjures a ring of shadows around you that reduces enemies' movement speed. In the case of Consuming Darkness and Veil of Blades, it does damage. And in the case of Bolstering Darkness, you give up the damage, but in return get Major Protection, which reduces the damage you take. And for Bolstering Darkness, you get 30% additional reduction for yourself. Actually, both versions give the Major Protection to you and your allies. In the case of Veil of Blades, you can have a synergy effect. Other people can trigger this, where If they activate synergy, they become invisible, they increase their movement speed by 50%, and it heals them for 27,000 with giggles build here over 4 seconds, which is pretty huge. Bolstering Darkness does the same thing. So basically what you're trading off is, do you want to do damage or do you want extra protection for yourself? I think Veil of Blades is pretty clearly the definite winner in this case, so it's the one that I always go for. The first actual power is Shadow Cloak, which morphs into Shadowy Disguise and Dark Cloak. Shadowy Disguise is the morph I've gone with. I think it's basically the overall winner. When you cast it, you become invisible for almost 3 seconds, and the next attack within those 3 seconds will always be a critical strike. That's pretty handy as compared to Dark Cloak. You become visible for 3 seconds, and when it ends, you gain minor protection, reducing your damage by 8% for 5 seconds. The 8% damage reduction is not really going to do a lot for you, and it's expensive to cast, so it's not like you could just keep that up constantly. The 3 seconds of invisibility doesn't sound like much, and for a stamina user, it's sort of limited because you're only going to be able to cast this a certain number of times. For a magic user, you can cast it over and over again and actually move a pretty fair distance invisible just by casting it every 3 seconds. The next power starts off as Veiled Strike, is another one that splits between Stamina and Magicka. And this is possibly one of the best spammable powers in the game, meaning powers that you can just cast over and over again. So the obvious one for the Stamina build is Surprise Attack. The nice thing about that is, in addition to being a Stamina power, it also inflicts Major Fracture, which reduces their physical resistance of the target, which means the next time you hit them, they'll take more damage. And if you attack with Surprise Attack while stealth and invisible, you can stun the enemy. So if you can combine Shadowy Disguise and Surprise Attack, you will hit with a guaranteed critical thanks to the Shadowy Disguise, and you will you'll stun them for 4.5 seconds or so, which is pretty good. On a lot of regular world mobs, you're not going to need to do that. They'll simply die too quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of bosses are going to be immune to the stun. So there's limited use for that particular combo, but it's still nice to have it available. The next power, which starts out as Path of Darkness, morphs into Refreshing Path or Twisting Path. Again, this is purely Magicka, so its utility for a stamina character is kind of questionable. You've probably got better things to put on your bar than this. But the short form is, it creates basically a column on the ground that will damage enemies that are in it. In the case of Refreshing Path, it will heal you. And in the case of Twisting Path, it'll do more damage. And for both of them, you'll get Major Expedition for a short period of time while you're in the path, or a short period after you leave it. And the path itself lasts for 11 seconds. So for a Magicka character, it's potentially useful. For a Stamina character, kind of less so, because the damage will be a lot lower too, since you won't have the Magicka stat to power it. The next power starts as Aspect of Terror and morphs into Mass Hysteria or Manifestation of Terror. This is almost purely a PvP power. The basic idea is you can fear something for a short period of time. 4.5 seconds with Mass Hysteria, and Mass Hysteria does 3 enemies. So in PvP, if you get surrounded by a small number of people, you can hit Mass Hysteria, make them all run away, and then potentially Shadowy Disguise to escape them. In PvE, having 3 enemies run away isn't particularly handy because you're usually attacking more than that, and 4.5 seconds isn't a lot of time to do anything all that impressive. Next power is Summon Shade, which morphs into either Shadow Image or Dark Shades. The difference there is with Shadow Image, after you cast it, you can cast it again to teleport back to the shadowy image. which allows some things like you cast it, run to one place, do something, and then pop back to where the shadow image was. Dark Shades simply gives you 2 shades that attack, and in both cases, the shades, in addition to doing damage, are afflicting the enemy with minor maim so that they do less damage for a period of time. For a stamina character, again, probably not awesome enough to take up some room on your bar. The last skill line is Siphoning. The ultimate there starts as Soul Shred, and then morphs into Soul Siphon or Soul Tether. Soul Tether stuns enemies, does damage, and siphons them, meaning you're receiving health for every enemy that you hit with it. So for 8 seconds or so, you're getting a lot of healing and can survive quite a bit. Allies can also use Soul Leech, which heals them. Soul Siphon, on the other hand, instead of doing damage, just heals people in a radius. So if you were a purely healing-based character, you might want that, or if you just needed some way to heal. Again, as a stamina user, you'll have different options and you won't be as focused on healing, so it's probably not that big a deal. The first real ability starts as Strife and morphs into Funnel Health or Swallow Soul. The difference between these two is Funnel Health will heal one of your other allies, so if you're in a party, your other party members will benefit from it, and Swallow Soul will only heal you, but you heal for 8% more. In both cases, it's a very low-cost, ranged ability that does significant damage to the enemies and provides a significant amount of healing for you. It's one of the really core Magic and Nightblade powers. For stamina characters, not as useful because there's not a stamina morph for it, so you won't do as much damage, and you won't be able to cast as much, but even so, it can still be handy to have on your bar, just as another form of health another way of getting your health back. What your build actually winds up being, though, can very easily leave this one out. The next power is Agony, which morphs into Prolonged Suffering or Malefic Wrath. This is the one junk power in the whole Nightblade line. Most classes have something like this where they can shut down one enemy for a long period of time, in this case 30 seconds, which sounds great. And then in this case, you can choose to either deal more damage when it ends or deal damage in an area effect. The problem is you can only have one of these in effect at a time, and if anyone does damage to the person who you've hit with it, they're freed from the effect. So that's not really that great. You're better off pretty much just taking them out rather than trying to do something like this. There's a few scenarios where it can be helpful, but it's really rare to find a place on your bar, either bar, for this to fit. The next power, though, Cripple, which morphs into Debilitate or Crippling Grasp. Again, for magic users, this can be a good power. It's a damage over time, and it's a fairly hefty damage over time. Plus, it gives you Major Expedition, which is always handy. In the case of Debilitate, if the enemy dies while affected, you get half the cost back, which is nice. And in the case of Crippling Grasp, it just does additional damage. So both of those are good. The problem is, for a stamina character, again, because it's magic-based damage, you're not going to have the stat to power that. So you're not really looking at your class skills as a stamina character, except for the ones that offer a stamina morph. Having said that, one exception is Siphoning Strikes, which become Siphoning Attacks, or Leeching Strikes. This one's really easy to decide which to do. Unless you're a tank, you do Siphoning Attacks. The reason being is Leeching Attacks is a toggle, so you can just leave it on forever, but it reduces your weapon power and spell power by 17%, which is a huge penalty, and the only people that aren't going to mind that much are going to be tanks who aren't really built to do damage. They just need to keep the resources up. And that's the point of leeching strikes. Basically, every time you hit with a light or heavy attack, you get magicka, stamina, and health back. In the case of siphoning attacks, which is the one you actually want to go with, again, you cast it, it lasts for 15 seconds. It does cost magicka, but it's worth spending it in this case because after you cast it, your light and heavy attacks will bring back both magicka and stamina for 15 seconds. So, cost 2020 magicka, it's giving me back 1090, 2 light attacks, and it's paid for itself. And then for the rest of the 15 seconds, it's helping bring back both of the abilities that you can, both of the stats you can be spending, which is another thing that Nightblades have, is they have some of the best sustain in the whole game. And the other nice benefit to siphoning attacks over the base form is any ability that you use has a chance to bring back magic and stamina. The last ability, and one of the best, starts as Drain Power and morphs into either Power Extraction, which you can see has a Stamina morph, or Sap Essence, which has a Magicka morph. In both cases, it's an AoE damage that does significant and noticeable damage. In the case of the Stamina version, it gives you Major Brutality, which increases your weapon damage by 20%. That's fantastic. Basically, you can jump into an enemy, fire this off, do a bunch of damage to them, and then everything else you're doing for the next 20 seconds has that 20% weapon damage boost on it. For Magicka characters, it's even better, actually. In addition to doing damage, it also heals you for each enemy hit. So it's just an unbelievable power for Magicka characters, but still a really good one for stamina users. One thing I didn't touch on yet was the passive abilities. And the reason for that is you want to get all of them. They're all fantastic, all useful. You don't have to get them as soon as they open up, but they're ones that are definitely worth looking for. So just to go over them quickly, in the Assassination line, you have Master Assassin, which increases weapon and spell damage while invisible or stealth by 10%, and stuns last 100% longer. That's great. You're probably not going to be attacking from invisible and stealth that much, so it's not super critical. Executioner's nice, but as a stamina character, getting the magicka back when you assassinate someone, again, not super critical, but still nice. Pressure points, however, is really key, and that increases critical strike for each assassination ability slotted. The more critical you can get, the better, so this is an important one to pick up. And then Hemorrhage increases damage dealt by critical strikes, which is, again, very critical. There's not many classes that get this, so it's great to have. In the Shadow line, you've got Refreshing Shadows, which is phenomenal. It increases stamina, health, and magic recovery by 15% once you get both of them. Nothing else does that. It's amazing. Shadow Barrier is kind of nice too. It says every time you use a shadow power, you get Major Resolve and Major Ward, which are big bonuses to your physical and spell resistance. The duration is 5 seconds, but that increases per heavy armor. One piece of heavy armor is enough to get a 25% bonus, bring it up to 5 seconds. The only ones they're going to be likely to be casting over and over again are Surprise Attack, which counts as a shadow power. Spam that and you'll almost always have your major protection up. Dark Vigor, for each shadow ability slotted, max health by 3%. Hard to say no to that. Dark Veil, it basically increases the duration of shadow abilities, so things like your Path of Darkness or your Hysteria last a little bit longer. Again, not critical, but nice. And in Siphoning, you've got Catalyst, which gives you 20 ultimate for drinking a potion. If you remember, Soul Harvest was 50, so that's 40% of the cost of a Soul Harvest from one potion. Magicka Flood, 8% max Magicka just for having a Siphoning ability slotted. Even for a stamina character, that's nice. Soul Siphon is extra healing, based on how many Siphoning abilities you have slotted. Not a big deal, so you can probably wait on that. transfer is nice though. Uh, Not something you'll necessarily get a lot of use out of, but once you get Sap Essence with Power Extraction, every Power Extraction that you do will give you 2 ultimate, providing they're 4 seconds apart. So that's the Nightblade class abilities. On to Dual Wield and Bow. So in the case of Dual Wield, the ultimate is Lacerate. Basically does damage and heals you. I don't have a bot, so I can't show you the morphs, but you won't get it until 50, so by that point you probably have a chance to research it a bit. Twin Slashes morphs into Blood Craze or Rending Slashes. This is a nice damage over time, and it heals you, so it's a good one to use. Just remember, as with any damage over time, don't spam it, meaning don't cast it over and over again right after itself, because that damage occurs in ticks over those 9 seconds. You can't increase it by casting it a second time right away. You have to wait until the 9 seconds is up and then recast. If you want something to spam though, there's Flurry. At a 0.6 second channel time, that's a really fast cast. It's not technically instant, but it's pretty quick. And it does a lot of damage. Bloodthirst has the advantage of healing you, so if you're feeling like you want to be a little bit more survivable, you can go that way, but most people go for Rapid Strikes because as a stamina character, you're pretty much going to be a damage dealer, and the more damage you deal, the better. One way to heal yourself is just to kill the enemy before they can hurt you, and so Rapid Strikes helps with that. Whirlwind morphs into potentially the best AoE in the game, and that's Steel Tornado. Does extra damage to enemies who've been injured, and the 9-meter radius is huge. You can hit a ton of bad guys that are around you with that. Whirling Blades is interesting. It gives you major endurance, which gives you stamina recovery by 20%. But the general consensus is that the extra range on Steel Tornado is better. Blade Cloak is one that's nice in theory, and there are some situations where it can be pretty handy, but it often doesn't have room on your bar. Basically what it does is it gives you a damage aura, meaning people near you will take damage, and it also reduces damage from area effects that target you. It's that second effect that people usually use it for, because 20% less damage from area effects in some fights is pretty key, where there's just too many of them for you to ever get out of all of them. You can morph it into Deadly Cloak, which increases the damage, but since the damage is kind of meh to begin with, that's not really useful. The more useful morph is Quick Cloak, which gives you Major Expedition, so you can cast this over and over again and move quickly around the battlefield. That's pretty much what a stamina user is going to be using this one for. And the last power is Hidden Blade. This gives you a ranged option just in Dual Wield. 20 meters is pretty good, and if you morph it, you can get it to 28. You can choose either to go for Flying Blade for the extra damage and range, which a lot of people will go for, or Shrouded Daggers, which will hit additional targets, so it makes it sort of an AoE. In both cases, and with the base version, you're getting Major Brutality, which increases your weapon damage by 20%. So if you choose not to go for Power Extraction from the Siphoning line, this one would give you Major Brutality as well. The passives here are, again, all useful, so you're going to want to take them all. You know, I have only one take, and that's because even Magicka characters can benefit from dual wielding because of this weird thing where each sword increases your damage done by 2.5%. That turns out to be any kind of damage, including spell damage. And they've never changed it, so if it's an oversight, it's one they've let stand. Otherwise, you can do axes to put a bleed on your enemies, or maces to ignore physical resistance, or daggers to have better critical rating. But the other passives are ones that increase the damage for enemies under 25%, making them sort of executes, not really. An extra 10% is not going to be that noticeable. Extra damage with your offhand, again, no reason not to do this. Reducing the cost of your dual wield abilities, that's pretty key, and you want to get that one as soon as you can, because the less your abilities cost you, the longer you're going to be able to hang in a fight. And then 8% extra damage for stunned, immobilized, disoriented, or silenced enemies. There's lots of powers that can do that to people, and the extra damage is nice to have. Now for bow, don't have bow worked up too much. See, it's the one skill Giggle doesn't really have much learning with. So I'm going to switch characters here. So here we have Pyrrha showing off the bow skills. The ultimate is rapid fire. Its morph is one of two things, either a standalone turret that will fire arrows for you, or a channel ability that you fire arrows with. Personally, I think the turret's a little better because that lets you do other things on top of it. But again, that's something you don't get until 50, so not something to worry about right away. Of the active abilities, the first one is Poison Arrow, and that morphs into either Poison Injection or Venom Arrow. The big difference between these two is Venom Arrow can interrupt casters, which is in some cases really crucial. You need to shut down a wizard who's casting, or stop someone who's using an ability that's interruptible, and you can do it from range. Poison Injection has the advantage of doing more damage. So if you want to focus on just pure damage dealing, Poison Injection is the right answer. Venom Arrow is a little bit more about utility. Endless Hail is an area effect. With the morph, it starts off as Volley, morphs into either Endless Hail or Arrow Barrage. The only difference between the two morphs is Endless Hail lasts longer and Arrow Barrage has a bigger area. Also, Endless Hail is a little bit cheaper, it seems. 2,000 stamina versus 2,700. So, an open question of which one you want to go for. Scatter Shot is one I haven't bothered taking. It's not as useful, and it's hard to find room for things on the bar all the time. But what it does is it knocks the enemy back by 6 meters and disorients them for a short time. The two morphs of it, Draining Shot and Magnum Shot. Draining Shot heals you at the end of the disorient, but 5 seconds is kind of a long time to wait for a heal. So that's more of just a nice to have. And Magnum Shot, in addition to knocking them away, knocks you back too, so it gives you more distance between the two of you. That said, there's a lot of times where you don't want to be knocking yourself 6 meters backwards. There's plenty of places you can just fall to your doom. And if you're not careful, you could easily knock yourself off a cliff that way. Bombard is a cone attack. Starts off as Arrow Spray. You can either do Bombard that inflicts an immobilize so they can't come closer to you for 2.7 seconds. Or you can do Acid Spray that does more damage. So again, it's the trade-off between utility or damage dealing. And then the last power is Snipe, which morphs into either Focused Aim or Lethal Arrow. And again, it's kind of a utility versus damage. Focused Aim has a little more utility because you can hit from farther away. In the case of... it does Minor Fracture, so it's nice if you're in a party and there's other people who can take advantage of that too. Lethal Arrow converts it to poison damage, which again, for a stamina character, once you start getting champion points, poison damage is something that you can increase. That will affect all of there's a champion point passive that increases poison damage and physical damage and disease, so anything in that area tends to be something that stamina will do a little better at as a result of that. Again, the passives are all worth getting. Long Shot gives you additional damage the farther you are away. Accuracy. As long as you have a bow equipped, you have additional weapon critical rating, so that's fantastic. Ranger reduces the cost of bow abilities. Any of the reduced cost things are tremendously useful to get. Hawkeye gives you a damage bonus based on doing light and heavy attacks, which is great to get. And hasty retreat is nice. When you do a roll dodge, you get major expedition for a short time, 2.5 seconds. So basically, if you're running along like this, you do a roll dodge, you can see I'm running slightly faster. Just helpful if you're moving. And as a stamina character, you can afford to roll dodge pretty often. Yeah, that didn't use up that much of my stamina, and by the time that wears off, I can pretty easily afford to do it again. So, there are a few other things I should note. Armor abilities. Your medium armor are all passives, except for evasion. As a Nightblade, you've got a better power than evasion. You've got blur. Although blur is magicka and evasion is stamina, so depending on your build, you might want to do evasion, or you might want to have blur as something you can dump magicka into. Major evasion gives you a 20% chance to be missed, and in this case lasts for 17 seconds. I think blur lasts for 20. So that can help mitigate some of the incoming damage. Dexterity is a fantastic one to get. Increases your weapon critical rating significantly based on how much medium armor you're wearing. Windwalker is basically required, and then it gives stamina recovery and reduces the stamina cost of abilities, so it gives you a lot more sustain. Improved sneak is just kind of nice to have. It reduces the cost of sneaking, it reduces the stamina cost of sneaking, and reduces the size of the area that people can detect you in, so in other words, you can get closer to them. That helps a little bit mitigating the fact that you can't cast the invisibility skill as often. And then there's agility, which just flat out increases your weapon damage. Should probably grade that. And then there's athletics, which increases your move speed while using sprint and reduces the cost of dodge roll. So that's, again, just a nice to have, but certainly worth it. Other things to look into would be your racial skills. Basically, get all of them. They're all passives. There's no reason not to get them. And in the guild skills, over in the Fighters Guild, as you build it up, Dawnbreaker is a fantastic ultimate. Camouflage Hunter gives you basically major critical, so it increases your weapon critical significantly. Intimidating Presence is just nice to have. Slayer does extra weapon damage for having a Fighter's Guild ability slotted, which if you put Camouflage Hunter in, you will. Trap Beast is also important because when you deploy it, you gain Minor Force, which increases your critical damage by 12%. And that's a pretty fair amount. I mean, you'll actually notice the difference in your damage per second numbers with this in place. And then Banish the Wicked, just for more ultimate as a Nightblade. You get additional 3 ultimate every time you kill undead, Daedra, or werewolves. So against those, you can build up ultimate even faster. Skill tracker is not particularly critical, since you're not going to be using your Fighter's Guild ability to deal damage that much, except for Trap Beast, but not that critical. And Bounty Hunter is only for Fighter's Guild quests in Cyrodiil, which, if you're not doing PvP, are not a big deal. And that's basically it. So hopefully this helped, and good luck in the game.